From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Is Donald Trump's presidential campaign in trouble? That's what some Republicans fear as the polls turn toward Kamala Harris, and the former president seems at a loss about how to respond. How did a campaign that looks to be Trump's to lose 3 weeks ago suddenly turn so sharply toward the Democrats? That's our subject today on Potomac Watch, the daily podcast of the Wall Street Journal opinion page. I'm Paul Gigot, the editor of the opinion pages, and I'm here with my colleagues Bill McGurn and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. Well, the polls have turned, but you don't need the polls to see the change. Enthusiasm for Kamala Harris is palpable. Big crowds and friendly crowds, and I dare say fawning media coverage. Another positive jolt this week with her vice presidential pick of Tim Walz, at least in terms of most of the media coverage. And Democrats are certainly united and now enthusiastic about her campaign, even though not too many weeks ago they were fretting that she'd be a worse candidate than Joe Biden. Remember that. Just a couple indications. New Marquette law poll has Harris in an 8-point lead with third-party candidates included. That's a flip from +3 for Trump not too many weeks ago. That's an outlier, a bit high in the national surveys, but 6 of the last 7 polls that we've seen have Harris leading. And though the polling in the swing states are still close, with Trump in narrow lead in a couple, but mostly tied, the Cook report, which rates elections, has moved Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada states to toss up from what had been leaning Donald Trump. And this is before the Democratic convention in Chicago in 2 weeks, which will give Harris and Walz presumably another boost. So, Kim, how much trouble is the Trump campaign in?
I think it's in real trouble, and this is largely self-imposed because this enthusiasm around Kamala Harris and her campaign has rattled Donald Trump, and that is very clear to see. In some ways, Paul, this should be the most simple campaign ever, okay? All he has to do is talk about these issues that have made Americans so unhappy, that have made Joe Biden such an unpopular president with low approval ratings, whether it's inflation or the border or crime or the disorder overseas with wars raging and newly emboldened adversaries, and say, hey, are you not happy with how you feel? By the way, just think about 4 years ago. When I was here, things were better. If you want to return to that, let's go back to my policies. Just go out there every day, Paul, and just talk about the price of groceries. It's not very hard. And yet Donald Trump, when he gets rattled like this, and I remember seeing it in COVID as the polls started to crater for him as stuff was going wrong, he just kind of loses a plot and he begins to meander all over the place. He can't seem to keep his focus. And that's what's happening on the campaign trail right now. He's going after Kamala Harris on very odd and issues that don't help him, may even hurt him with voter groups, picking gratuitous fights instead of concentrating on the easy theme of this election for him.
Yeah, Kim, I agree with you. I think the campaign is in some trouble. Significant trouble, frankly. It's not just the enthusiasm for Democrats who have united. It's that fact, the switchover, seems to have caught Trump by surprise. I'm not saying it's caught everybody in the campaign by surprise, but those of us who were at the Republican convention in Milwaukee, the mood there was ebullient. I talked to people about their cabinet positions. They were saying, well, they were up for. Really, I'm serious. I had those conversations. This guy's for commerce. I'm angling for state, that sort of thing. And now this is a real dogfight, Bill. And I guess the question I have for you is, do you think this transition of Harris caught Trump by surprise? And why can't he focus on a consistent theme, as Kim suggests?
Well, one, it obviously caught them by surprise, and it caught a lot of America by surprise. So that's one thing. Two, I cannot read Donald Trump's mind, so I'm not going to pretend to offer something. To me, it's very simple what Trump's problem and Kamala Harris's advantages. The challenge is to define her, mostly by her role in the Biden administration, and to associate her with all the bad policies that the Biden administration gave us, especially inflation and so forth. And it is a more difficult challenge for a Republican with the media in the tank for whoever is running against Donald Trump. I mean, if it was any other candidate, they would be demanding at every point, when are you going to give a press conference? When are you going to answer a question? And that's not going to happen. So Donald Trump, his real challenge is to define Kamala Harris and define her by the policies. As Kim suggested, and I think you said, there are plenty of policies that could be hung around her neck. And then she picks Tim Walz, one of the most left-wing governors in the country. I think that pick puts crime back on the table, given how he handled the George Floyd riots. So it's a surprise that he won't do it. I don't know that he'll write himself. I think he has to know it's not working, because he usually starts the speech, look at the polls, I'm leading here, and the polls have turned. It's still a small margin, but they have turned. So it suggests he's lost some momentum. And I think it's pretty simple for him. He just has to go back to the records. There's so much there. He doesn't have to do much digging that he could do to draw a contrast. And I think instead he's been attacking the governor of Georgia.
A Republican.
Who, by the way, I think my guess is Georgia will be one of the best states in terms of electoral guarantees. You know, they've taken a lot of steps to reform their laws and protect the ballot. It's a side fight, and I don't know why he does that. And then Harris's racial identity, whether she's Indian American or African American or both, he's got into that. And the result plus the media silence means she's got off scot-free. She's not defined to most of America. She's got off scot-free for both the Biden positions and her positions, which were often to the left.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll have more on problems with the Trump campaign as Kamala Harris surges in the polls when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with the Potomac Watch podcast here, the Wall Street Journal. I'm here with Kim Strassel and Bill McGurn. Kim, Donald Trump is scheduled a press conference for today at 2 p.m. We're taping this before that press conference. Interesting that he decided to do that. He clearly wants to get some media attention and start to dominate, or at least split the time and the media coverage. The question is what he's going to announce, if anything, and what he is going to focus on. But it is notable that he has decided to hold the presser. I think one of the explanations I have for Trump's inability to focus on a consistent message is that the critique that you, Kim, and Bill have laid out against Harris on policy, on issues, left of center results, these are on policy grounds. These are issue grounds. You have to make a case. You have to say the price of eggs has gone up X percent, but then you have to say why, and then you have to say what I'll do about it. Trump doesn't care about policy. It bores him to tears. It's not what he likes to talk about. You can almost see it. He even says it in some of his rallies. He said, they put all this stuff in the teleprompter, and I don't know, it's just boring. So then it's, off to, what the Green Bay Packers are going to do this year, a subject close to my heart, but probably not the decisive one for swing voters, except in certain corners of Wisconsin, or a riff on the late, great Hannibal Lecter. And the crowds love it because they think, he's Donald Trump comedian. But, those folks are going to vote for him anyway. It's the swing voters, and it's this definitional problem for Harris. Right now, she is out there giving gauzy speeches. Let's talk about the future. We're not going back.
I'm the change.
Yeah, well, I'm the change. And she's capturing the change message that voters want, right? They're not happy with the status quo. They want a change. She's capturing that change theme. And she's trying to portray Trump as the past and taking us back to some dark past, and notwithstanding the better economic record he had pre-COVID. And Trump is letting her get away with that.
Well, and she has working on her side the fact that as much as Donald Trump still likes to present himself as the insurgent and outsider, he's been on the political stage for a decade now. He's not necessarily new news. She is at least someone who was kept a bit in the shadows for good reason. She often was a little bit of a liability, especially when she was speaking off the cuff. But now here she is, and she's looking very disciplined. Everything's on teleprompter, and she is, in theory, a new face to people out there. So she has the opportunity to grab that change mantle. I was really struck, Paul. I went and purposely listened to all of the 18 minutes of Donald Trump's call-in to Fox and Friends yesterday and was struck by your point. They gave him about 5 opportunities to talk about the issues. They kept saying, let's talk about this issue. And he just kept going on saying, she's just so bad. She's so terrible. Like, she'll just be so terrible with no explanation of why she'd be so terrible. And even with all of these issues ready-made for him, I mean, they're just standing there annoying Americans every day, and he won't bring them up. Now, look, I think that Fox and Friends interview and this press conference are a recognition that she is benefiting from an enormous amount of what we call earned media right now. The press is all about focusing on her and her campaign. She's getting headlines without having to spend a dime in advertising money. And he's going to have to fight his way back into the headlines, but he's going to have to do it smartly. Apparently, he is going around telling allies who are nervous, understandably, that he's now going to focus on the issues. We will see if that is something he does in this press conference. Look, Trump can do it. I was really struck by his debate performance where he did marshal some numbers and figures and had those. He's good when he stays on teleprompter. But the question here, the number one word is discipline. And is he even disciplinable? If that's a word, I'm not sure it is, but someone's going to have to try to get him in hand.
Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is giving speeches, as you say, avoiding interviews, hasn't talked to the press. I think it's in about 18 days now. J.D. Vance has been making an issue of some of the Republicans. Let's listen to your interview, Kim, on your podcast with Trump spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt this week.
There's always doubts from the chattering class, but I think we've consistently broken expectations on this campaign. And we did predict realistically that there would be a little bit of a Harris honeymoon when this switcheroo happened. Of course, the mainstream media has come to her defense. Every Democrat is now claiming she's the greatest thing since sliced bread, even though in 2020 they were trying to boot her off of their own ticket in their own primary. So, of course, there's going to be a bit of a bump, but she is going to undo herself, and we will make sure that happens as well. But look, the woman can't speak without having a teleprompter nearby. She's just as incompetent as Joe Biden. She can't run for the cameras forever.
Well, why not, Bill? She can run from the cameras.
I made that point, by the way. That was my next question. I was like, really? I think she can, in fact.
Yeah, I agree. As long as the press lets her off the hook. And also, what I think the press corps is likely to do is ask one token question of the campaign. When are you going to give a press conference, and let it go? Whereas if this was Trump, they'd be demanding every day. There'd be articles every day on the news. There'd be logos saying 18 days without answering a question. There won't be a drumbeat. And as long as there isn't, I wouldn't change a thing if I was a Harris campaign, right? She has nothing to gain by answering extemporaneously. Trump may go down alleyways of issues and find one really obscure, weird, and go on about that. But she is not good answering on her feet. And I think the campaign should emphasize that as well as emphasize their willingness to do it. But I don't have any confidence the press corps will do anything but ask a token question so they can say, we did ask it of her campaign.
Well, there's some suggestion that I picked up that there might be a joint interview with Waltz and Harris before the Democratic convention. That's often the timing for candidates, maybe a 60 minutes interview, maybe something else. But they'll pick that interviewer carefully. It will be something that I suspect will be largely biographical. Tell us about why you chose this tremendous governor for the position. What was it about him that impressed you? Those are the kinds of things you'll get rather than what I think we really need as a country. Partisanship all aside here. Trump was president for 4 years, for better or worse. You can like him, not like him. At least we know roughly what he's about on a lot of things, on most things. And most people have a firm opinion about him. Kamala Harris is bidding to be commander-in-chief in a 100-day campaign. For 4 years, she would have to make decisions in a very dangerous world on foreign policy. And we frankly have no idea what she thinks about any of that. I don't. We have some intimations about her maybe being a little more to the anti-Israel side of things than Biden. But if there's been any big disagreement with her and Biden, we haven't heard it. So you can infer that she has been supportive of the Biden policies. But when you become president in your own right, What are her instincts? What is her analysis? Does she have any particular points of view? We don't know, Kim.
That's right. And I think it's even harder because we have two versions of Kamala Harris. We have her record as a San Francisco politician and prosecutor, her Senate voting record, and her 2020 presidential bid, all of which paint a picture of a fairly radical progressive agenda that she's on the record for. Then we have her as 4 years as Joe Biden's Veep partner, and Joe Biden at least is on the record technically still opposed to many of those more progressive radical policies. For instance, single-payer health care, which she previously had come out and said she supported. So who is this Kamala Harris? What would her own view be? And what we're getting is a series of now denials of some of her past positions via spokesperson, which would seem to count as a flip-flop, but with no explanation of where she really is. She now says, I wouldn't ban fracking. Okay, that's fine, but would you go after it on public and offshore lands? Would you try to further restrict it for private landowners? She's not saying, and she's trying to get all the way to the election without saying, I think, because she knows some of those positions could damage her, but she also doesn't want to upset her liberal base.